a hidden chapter, a deliberate erasure, and now an explosive leak. When Prince Harry's memoir Spare hit the shelves, readers sensed there was more beneath the surface. Whispers of a missing chapter began circulating almost immediately, but no one expected it to resurface with this level of vengeance. Its content? A blistering account of Camilla that some say was too dangerous to publish. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The silence surrounding Spare's editing process had always raised quiet suspicion. In early publishing discussions, insiders recall a chapter that felt emotionally volcanic, raw, relentless, and pointed directly at Camilla, the now queen consort. It was described as unforgiving, unfiltered, and borderline incendiary. At first, editors treated it as essential Harry's final reckoning with his family's past. But the closer the release date came, the more pressure mounted. Then, almost overnight, it was gone. Scrubbed. Buried beneath legal advisories and backdoor negotiations, erased from final proofs with chilling efficiency. But someone close to the project refused to let it disappear forever. The leak came quietly at first, a mysterious email from a secure, encrypted address sent to a UK-based royal author, containing what appeared to be early chapter drafts. Within minutes, word spread among select journalists and publishing insiders. The source? A former senior editor who, under the condition of anonymity, claimed they couldn't allow the truth to stay hidden. According to them, the royal legal team intervened during final proofing and demanded immediate removal, citing reputational risk and national interest. But more than legal language, the real reason became painfully clear: Camilla's name was all over it, and not in a way the palace could ever allow to see daylight. Within the pages of this suppressed account, Harry reportedly unleashes the full weight of decades of resentment. Not in tabloid-style jabs or petty insults, but in carefully chosen words that strike at the very heart of the monarchy's moral failings. The chapter charts a pattern of quiet domination, strategic ascension, and an unrelenting campaign to reshape public memory. Camilla wasn't simply cast as the other woman, she was framed as a calculated force who helped rewrite the royal narrative while pushing his mother's truth deeper into silence. What makes this even more gut-wrenching is Harry's own admission that he fought to keep the chapter in. The leak reveals that he clashed with senior advisors, and even issued a personal plea to the publisher to preserve it as a tribute to unspoken pain. But pressure from the palace reportedly became unbearable. According to one editor, a furious message was delivered to the publishing board: if this goes in, the firm will break. Harry, exhausted and cornered, eventually relented, but not without extracting a promise that early versions would be protected. That promise, ironically, would become the catalyst for this very moment. The leaked chapter is now the most explosive royal artifact in recent memory. It's not just a personal recollection, it's a direct challenge to the monarchy's version of events. One that reframes Camilla not as a rehabilitated consort, but as the central antagonist in a decades-long emotional siege. And at the center of this emotional earthquake is a grieving son who believes the woman celebrated today in pearls and royal titles played a devastating role in shattering his family's past. But to understand why this chapter was scrubbed, we must go back to the night that changed everything for young Prince Harry. Imagine being a boy haunted by the image of your mother, only to see her longtime rival rise to queen. Harry's suppressed memories and emotional confessions in this deleted chapter are soaked in pain, bitterness, and betrayal. Camilla wasn't just a figure in the background, she was a force he believed reshaped his entire life trajectory. For Harry, the confusion began early, long before the world knew how the story would end. He writes of childhood moments that never quite made sense at the time, whispered conversations cut short when he entered the room, forced smiles at family gatherings, and a woman who appeared again and again without explanation. Camilla's presence, he claims, felt unofficial yet permanent, like a shadow that followed the family everywhere but was never named out loud. As a child, he sensed something was wrong, even if no one dared explain it to him. Family dinners became emotional minefields. Harry recalls stiff silences broken only by nervous laughter, his mother growing quieter with each passing week, and his father caught between loyalty and longing. Camilla, he suggests, had an effortless way of disarming rooms, a warmth that seemed to win approval while quietly deepening Diana's isolation. Harry describes watching his mother excuse herself from the table, eyes red, composure shattered, while the adults pretended nothing had happened. Those moments, he writes, carved themselves into his memory far deeper than any public scandal ever could. In the chapter, Harry recounts moments when Diana tried to warn him never directly, never cruelly, but through fragments of truth slipped into bedtime conversations and long car rides. She spoke of trust, of appearances, of how smiles could hide intentions. Harry remembers her crying in private, telling him that some battles are fought quietly, and others are lost before anyone realizes a war has begun. At the time, he didn't fully understand. Years later, he believes he finally did. One line in the chapter stands out with brutal clarity. Harry claims that as a boy, he once referred to Camilla as the other woman who won. It wasn't said for effect. It was said in confusion and heartbreak, a child's attempt to make sense of why his mother seemed to be disappearing while another woman steadily took her place. He frames it not as hatred, but as the ache of watching truth lose to strategy. What tormented him most, Harry suggests, was the contrast. Diana's raw honesty versus Camilla's polished calm. One wore her pain openly. The other mastered survival through restraint. In Harry's telling, that imbalance mattered. It shaped public sympathy, rewrote history, and slowly pushed his mother's voice to the margins while Camilla's influence grew stronger, quieter, and ultimately untouchable. By the time Camilla's rise was complete, Harry believed something irreplaceable had been erased, not just Diana's legacy, but the version of his family that once felt real. And that sense of loss didn't fade with time. It hardened, followed him into adulthood, and began to bleed into every relationship he tried to protect. But what made Camilla's influence unbearable wasn't just the past, it was how she infiltrated the present, even within Harry's own relationships. Beneath her calm exterior, Harry paints Camilla as a master manipulator, someone who thrived in silence, puppeteering public narratives and reshaping royal loyalties. The deleted chapter describes how she allegedly planted stories, whispered doubts, and gradually alienated him from the institution and even from his own brother. Harry writes of a carefully constructed system, where Camilla, once viewed as an outsider, embedded herself into the very machinery that controlled royal perception. At first, he admits, it seemed harmless, just a few articles spinning favorable angles, reshaping public opinion about her and Charles. But as time passed, patterns emerged that he could no longer ignore. According to the leaked words, Camilla didn't just benefit from media spin, she allegedly helped orchestrate it. Stories about Harry's personal struggles, his outbursts, his so-called wild years, began flooding the press, and each time the palace remained disturbingly silent. It wasn't until much later, he claims, that he began to trace the origins of those stories, and the connections always seemed to circle back to one person. The chapter details how, during his most vulnerable years, Camilla worked with trusted figures in the royal press office, shaping a public image that suited her ascent, while conveniently sacrificing Harry's reputation in the process. He accuses her of feeding the tabloids morsels of his mistakes, carefully timed to distract from her own controversies. And with each leak, his credibility weakened. He began to feel like a pawn in a public relations game designed to elevate her, all while eroding his place in the monarchy. But the most damning revelations weren't about the headlines, they were about the private betrayals. Harry suggests Camilla actively interfered in the already fragile relationship between him and William. Moments of tension that could have been resolved in private were reportedly escalated through subtle suggestions, strategic omissions, and emotional manipulation. She allegedly planted seeds of mistrust, urging others behind the scenes to question Harry's judgment, his loyalty, even his stability. Slowly but surely, a rift widened between the brothers, not by accident, but by design. He describes the psychological toll as relentless. The paranoia that grew with every article, the sleepless nights wondering who was whispering in which ear, and the isolation that deepened as even close allies turned distant. He began questioning not just the press, but the people within the palace, those who once swore to protect him, but now seemed complicit in tearing him down. And at the center of it all, in Harry's telling, stood Camilla, silent, composed, and increasingly untouchable. This wasn't just about spin. It was about rewriting his place in the royal narrative. Camilla's strength, he claims, came from her ability to remain unseen while pulling every string. By the time Harry realized the depth of her influence, it was too late. The damage had been done. His public image was in tatters, his family bonds unraveling, and the media had already crowned her the misunderstood heroine of a love story that cost him everything. If spin was her weapon, it was Harry's marriage that became her next battlefield. Two women, both outsiders, yet only one was accepted. According to the lost chapter, Camilla's coldness toward Meghan was never subtle. From passive-aggressive remarks to back-channel sabotage, Harry lays out a damning account of how his stepmother undermined his wife from the start. From the moment Meghan Markle entered royal orbit, Camilla reportedly made her stance clear without ever needing to raise her voice. The chapter opens with Harry recounting the first meeting between the two women, a polite exchange, on the surface, but one he now sees as laced with quiet disdain. He writes that the air turned cold the moment Meghan stepped into the room, and Camilla's smile, though measured, never touched her eyes. The warmth that Camilla had so effortlessly projected to the press over the years evaporated when it came to welcoming the woman Harry loved. From the very beginning, he says, Camilla saw Meghan not as family but as a threat. What followed was a series of subtle slights that, to outsiders, might have looked like nothing. But inside the royal walls, every glance, every phrase, every omission carried weight. Camilla, Harry claims, dismissed Meghan's background with a tone that straddled curiosity and condescension. Her past as an actress, her American identity, her biracial heritage. Harry suggests Camilla couched her judgments in gentle concern, but that the effect was always the same, othering Meghan, minimizing her, marking her as not one of them. And behind closed doors, it grew worse. There were whispered comments at dinners, according to the chapter. Thinly veiled jokes that cut too close. Hushed conversations that conveniently ended when Meghan entered the room. It didn't stop at words. The chapter describes how Camilla allegedly influenced conversations with senior royals and advisors. When Meghan began gaining public popularity, especially in the early months, Harry believes Camilla saw echoes of Diana. The attention, the elegance, the people's embrace. And for a woman who had spent decades clawing back a reputation that once lay in ruin, Meghan's instant star power felt dangerously familiar. According to Harry, Camilla began planting concerns, subtle warnings about Meghan's Hollywood instincts, her media savvy, and her lack of understanding of royal duty. In truth, Harry argues, those comments were designed to erode support before Meghan could become too beloved. One evening, during a formal dinner hosted by the palace, the tension reached a breaking point. Harry recalls Meghan retreating early, barely able to mask her distress. He followed her, only to find her sobbing behind closed doors, shaken by a volley of what he calls ice-cold digs and strategic exclusion. That night, Harry writes, was the moment he saw the full weight of the royal machine crashing down upon his wife, and Camilla, he believes, was guiding the wrecking ball. But perhaps the most chilling moment came when Harry discovered that Camilla had allegedly voiced her doubts to the Queen directly. As Meghan struggled to navigate royal life, the support she hoped for from the top never fully came. Harry claims Camilla played a crucial role in that, quietly discouraging Her Majesty from backing Meghan publicly, casting her as unpredictable and unsuitable. That betrayal, he says, mirrored everything his mother once endured. The icy rejection, the subtle slander, the rewriting of worth behind palace walls. Harry's fury burned not just for what was being done to Meghan, but because he had seen it all before. It was as if the same script was being followed, only with new names. The chapter ends with a line that sears. They learned nothing from Diana. Or maybe they did and chose cruelty anyway. But nothing revealed in this chapter stunned more than what Harry claimed Camilla did during the Queen's final days. As Queen Elizabeth lay dying at Balmoral, family members rushed to say goodbye. But according to the erased chapter, Camilla's behavior behind those solemn walls left Harry shattered. From whispered orders to blocked calls, what happened in those final hours reveals a side of Camilla that few have dared to expose until now. It began with a call brief, vague, and strangely devoid of urgency. Harry remembers being told the Queen's condition had taken a turn. But there was no clarity, no insistence to come immediately. He hesitated only long enough to arrange his journey, but by the time he boarded the plane, dread had already crept in. And as he would later write, That dread wasn't about losing his grandmother, it was the unmistakable sense that something was being kept from him. What should have been a moment of unity quickly spiraled into a harrowing realization. Not everyone wanted him at Balmoral. And the one person guiding access to the Queen's final moments, he claims, was Camilla. According to the leaked chapter, Camilla allegedly took on a far more active role in managing the family's movements than anyone realized. Harry suggests that behind the palace's carefully controlled protocols, Camilla played gatekeeper, coordinating who was called, when they were told, and what they were told. William, he later learned, had been informed earlier, given a clearer picture, and offered a direct route to Balmoral. Harry, by contrast, received fragments. Details trickled down, late and imprecise, and the more he pressed, the more the answers became evasive. In hindsight, he writes, it felt orchestrated. In those final hours, Harry attempted to send one last message to his grandmother, a personal, heartfelt note he hoped would reach her before it was too late. But it never got through. He would only learn days later that the message was intercepted, redirected to the palace staff, and never placed in the Queen's hands. No explanation was offered, no apology made. And in that moment of grief, Harry was left to confront a chilling possibility, that his goodbye had been taken from him deliberately. The pain was worsened by what he describes as calculated indifference at Balmoral itself. While others were led through quiet corridors and allowed their moments, Harry was met with silence. Doors that should have been open were closed, eyes that should have offered comfort turned away. Camilla, he claims, maintained a poised, almost serene presence, but beneath that calm was a cold efficiency that left him isolated, shut out from both grief and family. One line from the chapter strikes like thunder. She didn't need to say I wasn't wanted. She made sure I felt it. In that fragile space between life and death, Harry began to piece together a narrative that had haunted him for years, that his place in the royal family had always been conditional. And in Camilla's calculated handling of the Queen's final hours, he saw that condition laid bare. He wasn't just excluded by accident. He was, in his words, cut out on purpose. This betrayal would lead to Harry's most dangerous decision yet, writing the chapter that would break every royal code. Before the book was finalized, a warning came. From King Charles himself. The chapter on Camilla, he said, would tear the family in two. But Harry didn't flinch until the palace's lawyers intervened, wielding pressure, threats, and something far more sinister. The confrontation wasn't scheduled. It came quietly, behind closed doors, with no aides, no advisors, just a father and son on opposing sides of a royal storm. Harry describes the meeting as emotionally charged but restrained. Charles didn't shout. He pleaded. He spoke of dignity, of legacy, of family honor. But beneath those carefully chosen words, Harry heard something else entirely. Fear. Not fear of scandal, but fear of Camilla being exposed. According to Harry, his father confessed that the chapter could unravel everything they had tried to rebuild. The monarchy, the marriage, the image of stability, it all hung by a thread, and Harry's pen was the blade. Harry didn't bend. Not then. He told his father that the chapter wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. That he wasn't out to destroy the crown, but to tell his side of a story that had been twisted by silence. Charles reportedly left the room pale and defeated, muttering something Harry never forgot: "This isn't just your story anymore." But Harry knew that was exactly the point. It never had been just his story. It was Diana's, Meghan's, and his own path through a world that was never truly built to hold him. What came next was more calculated. The palace didn't reach out with emotion, they sent lawyers. A team of them. The manuscript, already in its final stages, was quietly requested under the guise of legal review. Days later, the publisher received what they described as an urgent advisory. The recommendation was framed in professional terms: risk mitigation, reputational management, but the message was unmistakable: remove the chapter. There were suggestions, too, that unnamed sources might take legal action, that security concerns could be reevaluated, that consequences might follow. Then came the incentives. Harry was offered more than silence, he was offered control. Options for narrative spin, media coordination, even ghost-written tributes that would soften the public's view of Camilla. A quiet campaign, they promised, that would make it all go away. There would be additional funding for his charities, private assurances of support, even a potential bridge toward reconciliation. All he had to do was remove one chapter. Just one. He said no. Harry refused, but not recklessly. He understood the stakes. And so, with a heavy heart and a quiet strategy, he agreed to remove the chapter publicly. What the palace didn't know was that Harry had already made arrangements. He preserved the chapter in a secure vault of early drafts, entrusted to someone who believed the truth should never be erased. The deletion was a compromise, but it was never meant to be permanent. He deleted it from the book. Yes, but he never deleted it from memory. And now, the chapter has returned. The leak wasn't random. It was timed, targeted, and emotionally charged. The source? A trusted figure from within Harry's publishing circle, someone who believed the truth shouldn't be buried. But behind their courage lies a bigger question. What triggered this betrayal of royal silence now? According to insiders close to the publishing process, the anonymous source wasn't a disgruntled staffer or a casual observer. They were a key player and editor who had worked on Spare from its earliest drafts. They had seen every version, every edit, every compromise, and most importantly, they had saved copies. When the chapter on Camilla was removed under immense legal pressure, they complied outwardly but quietly preserved the original. For months, it remained untouched, locked away in digital archives. Until now, until something pushed them beyond their limits and into the eye of the storm. The timing was no coincidence. Just days before the leak, the palace held a private event meant to celebrate a royal milestone. Meghan, Harry claims, was deliberately excluded. Not overlooked, excluded. There were murmurs of an invitation being lost, a miscommunication, but behind the scenes he knew better. And so did the source. That night, as photos of smiling royals circulated the tabloids, the final draft of the deleted chapter was quietly uploaded to a secure server, sent to a select group of journalists under embargo. The message attached was brief. The truth deserves light. This was never supposed to disappear. But it wasn't just Meghan's exclusion that fueled the leak. It was the relentless press campaign against Harry that followed. In the weeks leading up to the event, headlines portraying him as unstable, disloyal, even dangerous began to resurface. Anonymous royal sources. Leaked briefings. A familiar pattern. The source, watching from the sidelines, recognized the playbook. They'd seen it used before against Diana, against Meghan, and now, again, against Harry. For them, it became a matter of conscience. To let the truth rot in silence was to allow history to repeat itself. And so, they broke the code. The palace, caught off guard, scrambled. Legal teams were assembled within hours. Meetings were called. Phone lines lit up from London to Los Angeles. But it was too late. The chapter had spread, encrypted and anonymized, and even the press knew it was untouchable. Any attempt to censor it would only confirm its authenticity. Behind closed doors, panic gave way to fury. And Camilla, according to palace insiders, was livid. Not because of what was written, she'd read it before, but because it had escaped. Because someone from inside had chosen loyalty to truth over loyalty to the crown. But the most chilling part came in the final line of the editor's message. This is only part one. A promise or a warning that what had surfaced was just the beginning. That buried beneath the layers of suppression, more secrets waited to emerge. More chapters. More voices. And possibly, a reckoning that would shake the monarchy's foundations far deeper than anyone had dared to imagine. And what's been revealed so far is just the beginning. Because the most devastating section targets Camilla's darkest alleged secret. Hidden inside the chapter is a moment that stops the heart, Diana's own voice. A private diary entry, never before seen, quoted by Harry in full. In it, Diana expresses fears about Camilla's intentions for her children. Her words are chilling and eerily prophetic. The revelation comes near the end of the deleted chapter, buried not in anger, but in grief. Harry writes that he held on to his mother's private diary for years, unread and untouched, too sacred to disturb. But as the pressures of royal life mounted and the patterns of the past began to repeat themselves with chilling familiarity, he felt compelled to open its pages. What he found was more than a mother's reflection, it was a warning. Written in Diana's unmistakable hand, dated just months before her death in 1996, The entry doesn't name Camilla directly, but the implication is unmistakable. Diana speaks of a woman close to Charles, someone whose ambition was cloaked in charm, someone who would, she feared, reshape the boys into strangers. The words echo like thunder through the narrative. Diana, isolated and bruised by betrayal, saw what others refused to see. A subtle rewriting of legacy already beginning. A cold war being waged not with rage, but with strategy. She will win, Diana wrote, not by love but by erasure. It is this sentence that Harry says broke him. He had always believed his mother sensed the dangers ahead, but to see it in her own words written long before the full unraveling of the monarchy's image shattered him. It wasn't just a fear she carried, it was a truth she felt in her bones. Harry describes reading the entry late one night, long after the chapter had been cut, in the quiet of his own self-imposed exile. And with every line, he saw connections that could no longer be dismissed as paranoia. Camilla's rise, his alienation, the manipulation he'd endured, the wedge driven between him and William, the silencing of Meghan. All of it felt traced back to this single entry. He realized with a chill that his mother had not only been right, she had seen it all coming. The emotional weight of that diary entry pushed Harry beyond the boundaries of protocol. It became the emotional spine of the chapter, the undeniable anchor to everything he was trying to express. Not rage, not vengeance, but heartbreak. The heartbreak of a son watching his mother's legacy consumed by the very forces she tried to warn him about. And in quoting her words directly, Harry wasn't just honoring her memory, he was reclaiming it. This moment isn't just dramatic. It's devastating. It connects generations of suffering, reveals a premeditated erosion of truth, and gives voice to someone who had long been silenced by duty and scandal. For Harry, the entry was both vindication and validation. It proved that he wasn't imagining the sabotage. He was living it. And worse, he was living what his mother had feared would one day come to pass. But with this revelation now public, Harry's next move could dismantle the royal illusion forever. The palace is scrambling. Legal teams are assembling. And behind closed doors, Camilla's fury is reportedly volcanic. As the public begins to digest the chapter's contents, the question becomes, will Harry be punished for a leak he didn't orchestrate, or will he finally be heard? Within hours of the chapter surfacing, the royal press machine kicked into overdrive. A statement was released terse, vague, and carefully worded. It referred only to recently circulated materials that were inaccurate and misleading, while never directly mentioning the leaked text. The message was clear: deny, deflect, and distance. But the public wasn't buying it. The statement only fueled the fire. For every royal defender clinging to official denials, there were thousands more poring over the leaked words, dissecting every line, and asking the question the palace refused to answer: if it's fiction, why does it feel so true? Harry, for his part, remained silent. No denial, no confirmation, just a void one that was immediately filled with speculation. Some saw his silence as guilt, others saw it as power. After all, he had nothing to apologize for. He hadn't released the chapter, but he had written it. And now, whether he liked it or not, the world was reading his most unfiltered thoughts. Meghan, too, stayed quiet, but her silence carried a different weight. To her supporters, it was dignified, measured. To her critics, it was telling. Together, their silence only deepened the suspense. Across social media and global headlines, Camilla's image, once rehabilitated, polished, and carefully maintained, began to fracture. Public opinion split sharply. Some called the chapter a betrayal, an unforgivable attack on a woman who had done her duty. Others called it justice, the long overdue unveiling of truths long buried under royal protocol. The language was raw, the emotions divisive. But there was one thing almost everyone agreed on: nothing about this felt manufactured. This wasn't tabloid gossip. This was a wound torn open. Inside the palace, insiders reported chaos. Tensions that had simmered privately for years boiled to the surface. Camilla, once described as the glue holding the royal family together, was now being blamed for triggering its most public unraveling in decades. Even among royal allies, whispers grew louder. Some questioned whether pushing for the chapter's removal had been a fatal misstep. Others argued it should have been handled with transparency from the start. Either way, the trust inside the monarchy was unraveling fast. One insider was quoted as saying, "Whatever unity was left, it's gone." As speculation swirled, so did rumors. There were hints of a second book, even more explosive than the first. Others claimed an exclusive documentary was already in the works, prepared to release footage and recordings backing up the chapter's most damning claims. The public was hooked. Publishers circled. Streaming giants made calls. For Harry, it wasn't just a chapter anymore, it had become a movement. Because in the battle between silence and truth, one thing is certain: the monarchy will never look the same again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.